Welcome, everybody. So today is Thursday, August 4th, 2022. Today we're talking about office space. This is a core session or a core topic. As I was just telling everybody who's online with us today, the core topics are sessions that we try and do every year, so they're repeated sessions. These are the things that we think are the most important things that are the things that we get asked about the most as experienced independent consultants who are presenting and sharing our information with our new colleagues. And so these also become topics that are part of conference sessions or a pre-conference workshop. And so when I do those workshops, and we are accepted to do it, by the way, we're negotiating on some of the details around that right now, but we are accepted to do a pre-conference workshop, actually two pre-conference workshops, a full day one on Tuesday and a half day one on Wednesday. So if you're interested, feel free to keep an eye out for that and look for it. Anyhow, Jocelyn, I'll make sure I get those YouTube videos to you. I see that topic. So today we're talking about office space, and I think you should be able to see my screen. We've got literally the movie Office Space up there. I thought that was a funny little movie. My name is Matt Feldman, and I run the IC Topic Chats most of the time. But we're talking about different places to work and why you'd want to work from different places. So one of the key places that most of us start out and where we stay working is we work from home, right? And this is a treehouse in somebody's backyard. When we did a survey a couple of years ago about where people work from, somebody put that they work in a treehouse in their backyard. I think they were being silly, and so I thought it was hilarious. And so it becomes kind of a recurring theme. Why would you want to work from home is the question. Obviously, the pros and the cons are it's inexpensive. You already have the place where you live, so being able to work from there is convenient. You got to love that commute, right? The commute of just walking down the hall or walking from your bedroom to your kitchen table or wherever you work. One of the other pros most people don't think about is that you can pay yourself rent, or you can use it as a cost, as a write-off, depending on how you set things up with your taxes. You'd want to talk to an accountant. So if you are working from home, that is a business expense. When I worked from home previously, and I actually still work from home and I still have an office at my house, I pay myself rent. So the way you do that is you look at the square footage of your house. And in my situation where I own a house, if you had an apartment and you were renting, you look at the square footage of your apartment, look at the total costs, and then what's the percentage of that space that's dedicated to your office, and that is the percentage of your monthly costs that you can pay yourself in rent. So for me, $265.49. And I know that because I make that payment to my household, i.e. my wife, once a month. The con is obvious. At a point where you have other people that you're working with, it's difficult to do that. My colleague, Tom, a lot of you guys know my colleague, Tom, came to my house in the early days of working with me, and we worked upstairs in my office. And that was fine while I was there, but we eventually came to that point where I needed to go to a meeting and he didn't need to be there and he didn't have a place to go. So that was not very convenient for us. And we weren't quite at that comfort where he could just walk into my front door and walk upstairs and walk to the office across from my son's bedroom. So we realized pretty quickly that wasn't going to work out for us. So, and obviously your dog, your spouse, your mother-in-law will interrupt you because that's what happens. And we all know that from COVID, but that is a con at some point. And plus, if your work's right there, it might be hard to walk away from it because you're at home already. That's another COVID thing. So working from home is pretty obvious. Do make sure you understand that you need to be thinking about how there are cost benefits of having an office in your home, and that you can, and paying yourself rent because I'm set up as an S Corp is actually a pretty convenient way to avoid some taxes and money that comes back into the personal side of my income. And it's totally legal and appropriate. The next place you may want to think about is the coffee shop or the library. Here's a situation where you could go to the Starbucks or whatever local coffee shop is around, and you can work from there. Don't forget libraries as well. They usually have free Wi-Fi. There's a lot of access. There's oftentimes places that's a good place to meet your clients or potential clients, things you're trying to put together. Coffee shops are a regular thing to go. The problem with these public spaces is that really they're not meant to be there permanently. So it doesn't become a permanent situation. You can't really store stuff anywhere. There's a hidden cost because there's that expectation that you're buying things, right? That you're buying coffee, that you're buying lunch. And so one of those hidden costs is probably in your waistline because you're going to probably consume more calories than you ought to. If you're eating out all the time, it's not a good idea. There's no privacy. And this is actually a data concern for you as well. If you're working with private data, probably don't want to be on a public Wi-Fi for a lot of time because you just never know who's out there. And you don't really have the opportunity to protect those data that way. So most of us do work with protected data, so we want to be concerned about that. Yeah, so this is really not a long-term solution. It's certainly a great solution for most of us do this when we're in between meetings, we're just meeting with somebody, or if you find yourself out of town on a family thing and you just need to get away from your family, it's not a bad idea either. Speaking of which, and this isn't in here, it's just something that occurred to me, don't forget to use the business meeting rooms and business spaces in your hotels when you're in this, because you may be there with a family member. They may want to sleep. This happens to me a lot. My wife's a great sleeper, so I'll go downstairs, and usually I have a pretty good situation where I can set up in their sometimes closed room, sometimes public space to work at a desk in the lobby. The next place you should think about is a co-working space. These are pretty familiar to us. This is an affordable way to get a dedicated space or a space that could be a drop-in space, depending on how much you pay. It's set up like a rent. Usually there's not any other costs, just here's the cost per month. You can upgrade or downgrade the space. So you may start off with just having, the ability to come in and sit down at a table. I've not used a true co-working space. I'll tell you about my specific situations in a little bit, but you can upgrade or downgrade. You could be at just a table. You could upgrade to a desk. You could upgrade to a dedicated office or cubicle. You could upgrade from there perhaps into an office with a door. You should have access to somewhere where you can store your things. Everything's going to be a little bit negotiable, and things are going to be different in different places. These places usually have free coffee and beer, maybe beer. I know we have a place called T-Rex downtown, St. Louis, that I guess gives away free beer. I don't know how you get away with that, but I guess it works. But certainly, usually there's free coffee. They also oftentimes have administrative support if you need it. So people could direct your phone calls to you, or they could facilitate other things. And also, they usually have meeting space. On the other end of things, the cons, there may be distractions and noise from other people. You may or may not have privacy, and you just depends on what's available. You may have the right amount of space, or you may not. You may want more meeting space. If you start to expand and you have more coworkers, people that you hire, you may find that this is no longer a great situation. So moving up to the next place would be lease space. So a space that you lease from somebody who owns a building. Key ideas around here is that you want to try and lock in a price. You may actually find that this is something to talk about with an accountant or a lawyer. You could actually lease the space as an individual and then sublease it to your company. And that's another way to kind of see some flow back to your personal income. So the reason you do that is you would actually charge yourself more. You need to be careful about that. Definitely a conversation for an accountant. Something my lawyer brought up with me once. So why don't you just sublease space to yourself? And I said, is that legal? Because I'm a lawyer, it's legal. So I thought it seemed kind of shady, but who knows? leasing space frees up capital versus buying a space, and we're going to get into that next. So you have space that at a cost that covers your space, but you don't have to worry about all the additional costs of insurance you may have insurance, but it's saying not insurance for the building. You may not have those costs for taxes along those lines. So that frees up capital. That's why people will lease space. And you often can find a nicer location than something that you would afford to buy. Some of the cons to lease space: triple N. That's net. That means you may be in a situation where you're on a contract where you have a triple net lease. That's NNN, and the nets. I can't remember what each one of them are, but effectively, it's like owning the building. You would pay the taxes, you would pay them a lease amount, you pay for all the costs of utilities, and that's a very expensive way to go, but it may be the better way. It's effectively like owning the building, except you don't in fact own the building. The reason you would do that is that it's a location that's desirable, it's set up, it's ready to go. And so a lot of businesses do go into a triple net lease, and that makes sense for them. I would argue that we don't necessarily need the nicer spaces, but that's me personally talking, and that you can probably find a better situation where you don't get locked into a triple net lease. But oftentimes you do that because it's just a fantastic location that's really set up for your organization. You don't get equity out of a leased space, meaning it's like renting an apartment. You're paying somebody for the privilege of living in their building or working in their building. You may still have some upfront costs, particularly in a triple net lease. Let's say here's your office space, and it's just a shell, and you need to outfit the shell, and you need to build walls, perhaps you need to build the bathrooms and everything like that. Or you need to reconfigure the space so that it fits your needs, and that is likely going to be a cost that you pay for. And there are perhaps variable costs, meaning they could change the cost of your rent. And I'm gonna ask you guys to share some comments on all of this in just a little bit. Finally, we have purchase space, and this is for me the big idea. It's an expensive idea, and most people tell me I'm crazy, but I like the idea of building equity over time. And I'm convinced that even with the recent price increases for a lot of space, I think we're still going to see inflation, and we're still going to see growth. So I'd still be able to lock in. Why would you do this? Well, the pro is that you can. If I had bought a space when I was talking about this a year ago, I would have just seen all the accumulation that's happened in the past year with both property accumulation and with inflation. You can lock in and have a fixed cost. You know what you're going to be paying. You're still going to have taxes and things like that, but if you lock in a low rate for your interest rate, that's what your cost for your building is going to be. You're in charge. I put you to boss. You are in charge of your space. You can dictate office hours. You can dictate everything about your space within reason to your city and community. And then you could actually perhaps build enough space to lease space to others and use that as a second revenue or an additional revenue to your business. The con is you might see market decreases. So a lot of people might be nervous to buy a place right now because things just went up so much. Is the market going to push down? Who knows? You might have some opportunity loss. That means because you're putting up a lot of money to do this, that's money you can't use to hire a second person or a third person in your business. You can't. That's money that you can't use towards other resources. You may want to do that. So you need to balance whether you want to buy a space or lease a space, which is going to be less overall, and use that extra money towards an employee or some other costs. There will be maintenance, right? You're going to be the person, because you're the boss, you're also responsibility for everything. We all know about this If you own a house, you know about this. There's always that, like I'm dealing with an air conditioner that's on the fritz right now at home, which is fun. You'll have those sorts of headaches that come along with it. There'll be always a new surprise. I have some creative ideas because I've done a lot of creative things with space, and that's where I put this last slide. So you could always reach out to your clients that you've been working with for several years. I did this. I worked with the Regional Office of Education in St. Clair County, and I said, hey, do you have a space that you can give me to work in? Because I want to work somewhere other than my house. And so they said, sure. So I went and worked there 3 days a week, and it was actually a wonderful way to connect with my client and to build new projects. And it was actually a good use of my time, and it developed a relationship. And we celebrated my birthday. It was wonderful. So I had that whole situation like I was in an office when I was just a one-person operation. You might want to ask around about any excess space. If you have put out something to your friends in your community, maybe through Facebook, or just talk with people when you're out for a walk or in your Zumba class or whatever. Say, hey, do you know of anybody who has excess space? And there may be spaces that people aren't advertising or never even thought about using for an office. There's probably a lawyer or an insurance agent in town that has a 5 office space, and they never thought about leasing out a space to somebody else, and they only need 3 or 4 offices, and so maybe they can give you a space for a reasonable amount of rent. So these are oftentimes the best way to go about it. If you're looking for an office as opposed to go into the co-working space, those offices are often pretty great because people are not necessarily charging that much for it, and they may enjoy having you there. So I've also negotiated to have a space at a local university because I work with universities, a bit like the negotiating a free space with a client, and negotiated a free space at a local university, and they gave me a space for a year, and it was weird and inconvenient, but it was an interesting idea. I was effectively trying to start a research center for them, but it was privately held. I still am that organization. It's easier for me not to be at the university. It got into a little bit of politics and whatever. It was fine for me for the time, but I think it is an option for some people. Every university and every coordinated effort is going to be different. Finally, just look around. I mean, you may just kind of ask around. One of the spaces down the hall for me where I am right now was a space that was, given to a politician who was running for office. And I was around the corner, and I was in a not so nice space. And this space around the corner right here down the hall was given, complimentary to this politician who was running. They ran their campaign, they won, and then they moved out to a really nice office down the street, and nobody even knew the space was available because it was one of those things where somebody who owned a whole bunch of spaces and they didn't really know what was going on. And I knew that space was available and I really wanted it. So I started asking around about it. I negotiated a very favorable rate for the space. And frankly, they didn't even know it existed until I said it was available. They'd forgotten that the politician was out. And so the long and the short of it was I found a space, asked about it, negotiated a good rate, and ended up in a good space. So as I like to do, I like to talk about 5.5 key ideas. So here's key ideas here for you about office spaces. First, if you're going to buy, wait till you have 15% down. There are different creative ways to do this, but you definitely want 15%. This is the amount that my banks shared with me because I ultimately do want to buy a space. Think about paying yourself rent. You can pay yourself rent if you work at home. So make sure you're doing that, or at least talking about the equivalent of that through the tax write-offs that you may have if you're working as a sole proprietorship. I could go into some level of detail on that in the chat. Frankly, you're probably better off talking to your accountant about how to do that because there's nuances by state and also by type of organization. That's how you're set up. Make sure you don't buy or rent more than you need. You might end up committing too much in expenses to your rent than the amount that you should. So be careful. That being said, if you do that, if you do end up buying more, think about ways to use that as another revenue source. So think about how you can lease that out to somebody else who you want to work with. Accountants and lawyers are both good people to reach out to, and who are often looking for additional space. When you're getting ready to sign a contract, I would recommend you have a lawyer look at your contract. Read the contract carefully. There's often provisions in there that are just normal standard provisions that you're not used to seeing, and so you want to make sure you understand. For me, when I signed a contract or a lease with a place, they wanted me to notify them like 6 months before I intended to leave, and I was like, what? Anyway, so I knew that. I didn't know that the first time when I left, but then I learned that it was a situation. They were cool with it, but it was kind of awkward. I was like, that seems like a crazy number of months in advance. But anyhow, make sure you're reading your contract. And then think creatively, because I think the standard approach is going to cost you more. If you can think creatively about where space is, places that maybe I didn't suggest, you might find yourself in a situation where you can get a better space for less money than what you might have thought of, but just by asking around and trying to negotiate things with clients and things like that. So, of course, use your social network for ideas. Thanks for listening to the upcoming session. Speaking of social networking, we're going to be talking about networking karma next week. That's one of my favorite topics. If you know anything about me, I talk about this all the time. And then Naima who's here today, should be talking about incorporating equity. You can see some of these other sessions. We have a session with Susan Wolf on September 1st. I have to be a part of a client meeting during this time on September 1st. So Susan Wolf, maybe she'll share with us what she's planning to do. I don't know. Anyhow, you can see the other sessions that are coming up, but we are booked up through October 6th. I'm excited about that. And we should be booking up through the end of the year soon too. So I see 13 comments in the chat. I'm going to stop the recording and let's get into the chat portion.